Good afternoon. This is John Majori. I'm here with Professor Anthony DeCurtis, um, noted music journalist and academic music expert, um, uh, distinguished lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania, who has either written or edited multiple books, including a recent biography of Lou Reed. And we're here today in large part to talk about David Bowie. Professor DeCurtis has taught a class at the University of Pennsylvania about David Bowie, which fascinates me. And I'm very, very grateful for joining me here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for your interest.
Yeah, thank you. So why don't we get right into it with that topic? I'm fascinated by the idea of a class on David Bowie. I'm interested in your syllabus if you have an overarching theory of Bowie.
Um, I don't have a syllabus because the nature of the class, I mean, every spring I do a music related, or as we might say today, music adjacent class. I mean, I teach in a creative writing program, so it's not, the history of David Bowie or the Beatles or, um, you know, Lou Reed. But um, what I do is try to make the class uh, as improvised and spontaneous as I possibly can. So I don't really use the syllabus. I mean, they have to do, 4 assignments, which can take any kind of form that they want. I mean, the ideas for the music and the lives of these individuals, in the case that we're discussing, David Bowie, to serve as, inspirations for the student's own creativity. So, you could write a song inspired by a David Bowie song, or you could write a short story or a poem, or you can write, criticism. You could make them, a video. Uh, and so you're able to take that in, any direction that you want. Uh, the Bowie's class, was pretty good. I was a little surprised. Um, the students, I always do this thing. I mean, I don't know why this is exactly, but I always do these classes thinking I'm going to, attract students who have just been waiting for the day of, to be able to go into a David Bowie class or a Velvet Underground class or, whatever. But in fact, what I typically get is students who, oh, yeah, I've heard about David Bowie, or, my father always liked David Bowie, or my mother did. And, I was always curious to find out more about him. Now, that's perfectly fine. It requires, uh, oddly, that I actually teach more than I thought I would have to. Like I wanted to sort of avoid, the, I mean, I always said to them, look, we're going to be respectful of chronology, but I don't want to really be, uh, you know, I'd have to bear the weight of chronology, like I want to go based on what we get excited about. If I find us moving in a particular direction, I want to be able to pursue it, rather than think, oh, gee, well, we'll get to that later. Um, the Bowie class ended up pretty well, though. I mean, I have to say, we had a good time in there. It took about. I mean, the class meets once a week for 3 hours, so it's a haul once you get in there. Um, I play music for them. We did a lot of uh, watching performances. We watched The Man Who Fell to Earth. We look at stuff and then discuss it. And I then hope that they'll go out and, do something interesting. About halfway through the class, that began to happen. I think, you know, I realize I'm talking a lot, by the way. I'll stop, but shortly. But you know, about you know, I mean, Penn students tend to want to know what they're supposed to do in a class. You know, they're very good students, but and you know, as a rule, they're pretty smart. Um, but they, you know, they know how to be in school. And part of the point of the class is kind of not to be in school,
Right.
to not really proceed that way. So you kind of have to, it takes some time typically for them to get out of that mindset and then start doing interesting things. But you know, we did get there. And by the end, it was quite moving when we were, you know, tracking that, you know, strange late period of Bowie's. And you know, the you know, amazing integrity that he showed in, you know, dealing with, you know, the onset of his death. Uh, you know, they were pretty riveted when we got into all that. Um, you know, so it was, you know, it was a pretty intriguing class as it goes. I'm going to try to do it again next year, next spring. I started out not really wanting to repeat an artist, but you know, I thought there were some things left to do, particularly with Bowie.
I'm going to tell you a question I'm going to ask, but you said something I want to jump right to. I'm not asking yet, but I was interested in, I know that you've taught classes on different artists and you've used them. Maybe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, as a sort of a launching point to explore writing or critical thinking,
Yeah,
and
creativity broadly, yeah.
creativity. And how does somebody like David Bowie um, serve that purpose, whereas perhaps certain other pop stars or musicians might not? But before we get there, you mentioned something about how many of your students were not particularly familiar with David Bowie,
Yeah.
and something that I wonder. I'm 55 years old, and for you know, not the entirety of his career, but for at least half of it, it was sequential. So I came to Black Star as the final album, but I'm wondering what the experience is like when it all exists at the same time. So if your students are encountering it all at once, Ziggy Stardust and Black Star come into their consciousness at the same moment.
Yeah. Uh, Part of the struggle of the class and the opportunity of the class, the challenge of the class, is to try to recreate um, to kind of recreate um, the impact that these artists had at the moments when they had them. You know, it's difficult. You know, um, you know, they've lived through a lot, even though they're quite young. Um, excuse me, and you know, the outrage, you know, that, I mean, hip hop, you know, for example, is it's difficult to uh you know, I am teaching a Rolling Stones class now, and you know, I was trying to just last week, as a matter of fact, I went through. I thought I'd do it all at once, which I still can't tell if that was smart or not. But like all of the Stones, like kind of controversies. So I played that song "Stupid Girl." I played, um, you know, "Under My Thumb." I played "Stray Cat Blues." I played uh, "Brown Sugar." You know, I showed them the billboard for "On Black and Blue" for the Rolling Stones, and I love it. Um, you know, and you know, and the basic notion that everybody carries around at universities, and certainly when I talk to people who don't spend time on campuses. They think, that there's this, incredible kind of woke, hypersensitivity among students, which I've encountered from time to time. But, I'm playing these songs and they're like, if you've listened to like, all of the like, I'll blow your brains out, suck my dick, hip hop stuff, look at that stupid girl, doesn't really, you know, as one young woman in the class said, that sounds like a song that like a middle school boy would write. Um, so you're presented with the challenge of trying to put them in a place where they get how shocking and offensive or outrageous some of this stuff was. Now with Bowie, again, all the gender stuff that, we're fascinated by with Bowie, and I was fascinated by when it first happened. Man, I mean, all they talk about these kids is gender all the time. Like, there's so he wore a dress, so he shaved his eye. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's you have to try to find a way to really get them to feel it, that it wasn't always that way, and that one of the reasons why these things have become uh I won't say accepted, but have become part of our discourse is because of someone like David Bowie.
Yeah.
You know? I can't remember what your question was, but I mean, I sort of feel like that, that is what I see as the challenge of the class. Like
Yeah.
you try to get them into a frame of mind where they're really, having some semblance of understanding um, the outrage,
Yeah.
why it was so wild.
So that reminds me of something else, and I'll backtrack in a moment. But I'm thinking about when I was in college, there was a book by um, I would call him a conservative from the University of Chicago, Alan Bloom, who identified Mick Jagger as the personification of everything that's wrong with the decline of Western civilization. And I sort of think that it's interesting that the potential controversy 30 years ago was almost in the opposite direction. And today, you're teaching the Rolling Stones at an Ivy League institution, and the potential controversy is not that he's too shocking from a conservative perspective, but that he might be offensive from the opposite direction.
Well, yeah, like, look, Brown Sugar. I mean, even Jagger. I mean, the
Yeah,
Stones don't play that song anymore,
yeah,
which is, pretty remarkable. Um, I think playing around with the, slavery imagery, which I think he did, and he's never said this and wouldn't ever say it probably, but it was about it's about a kind of sexuality that's called race play, and like I think um, the Stones look at sexuality and Jagger's look at sexuality is always kind of, at least in part, about power. And so, he's not making a case of justifying slavery,
yeah,
that's ridiculous. But, hear him whip the women just around midnight,
yeah,
that's meant to be sexual, I think.
yeah,
That's not like, oh, this slaver is, a great guy and we should endorse what he did. And the next verse, you know, the lady of the house is sleeping with the houseboy.
yeah,
The houseboy knows that he's doing all right. Um, it's tough to make these arguments these days. And in fact, I didn't in class. I mean, they didn't seem, again, they didn't seem particularly outraged by the song. You
yeah,
know, I said, look, I did the whole trigger warning bit before we got into all this. Particularly like God. I thought, you know, that image of, you know, on Black and Blue from the Rolling Stones is like pretty raw. I think
Yeah,
even, you know, by the standards of kids who've probably been looking at pornography since they were 10 years old, you know. Uh, but yeah, it didn't really seem to phase them that much. You know, my daughter, as it happens, is a freshman at Penn and is sitting in on this class. And I asked her, and I said, you know, what did you make of all that? And she just, you know, she just seemed to kind of shrug it off, you know. So it's, you know, you run into these kind of conundrums, and you know, so like, you know, some of the Bowie stuff, uh, you know, where he's performing, you know, in this tiny bikini or is on his knees in front of Mick Ronson and all this
yeah,
other business, that um, you know, they said they get it, but they're not, you know, they're not you know, they're not really shocked by it.
yeah.
But, you know, you have to, you know, you try to build up the social context and the period context, and you know, this is where you have to do chronology. You know, you have to say like, look, you know, this stuff is going on in the early 70s, and you know, this was pretty outrageous for that time, and that's why people were kind of bothered by it.
So I've thought for a while, and you're kind of disabusing me of this thought that if if I was my age um, now when Bowie was in front of Mick Ronson, I wouldn't have thought of something like Al Jolson to be as edgy as the early '70s Bowie still seems to me today. But your experience is that younger people aren't particularly finding that time of Bowie's career particularly edgy at all.
Well, you know, again, you have to, you know, you have to remember the things that they've kind of
Yeah,
grown up around,
yeah,
you know. And so I think by that standard, yeah,
yeah.
you know,
Did,
it, you know, like the little Nas X, you know, has like a, you know, a gigantic #1 hit, you know. And so like, okay, you know, he's black, he's gay, he's, you know, you know, does all this kind of anti-Christian stuff, you know, like, you know, so then how do you manipulate them into manipulate? How do you maneuver them into a spot where they could see what Bowie was doing back then as, pardon me, as wild and outrageous
yeah.
it was? You know, it's you know, they kind of, you know, they get there somewhat. You know, they eventually. I'm a little bit kind of by virtue of wanting to make it clear, I'm you know, kind of overstating it a bit. But you know, they you know, they have they're who they are. They grew up when they grew up, you know, and you have to, you know, you have to start where they are, but also get them to go somewhere else. Like that's, you know, the classes are more complicated, I suppose, is what I end up, you know,
Yeah.
what I'm saying now, I suppose, and what I end up experiencing.
The I write about David Bowie every day, and I'm more of a casual fan of the Rolling Stones or Bruce Springsteen or Lou Reed. But it strikes me that Bowie's lyrics are more challenging to interpret than many others. Maybe the one exception that I can think of is Bob Dylan. Does that is that a dynamic that comes into play when he's the subject of a class?
Um, you know, much as I uh spend almost all my time thinking about lyrics, you know, they don't seem to that much. And
Yeah,
you know, trying to again, uh, you know, recover like, you know, the kind of clockwork orange sources of some of
yeah,
both lyrics,
Yeah.
and uh, even you know, I show them, we obviously go through the whole, all of the personas, you know, and you know, by the time like you get around to like the Thin White Duke, you've kind of gone, on a bit of a journey. And after that, well, you get the Berlin stuff, I suppose, but you know, it becomes difficult to locate, you know, I don't know what you might call as a Bowie sincerity, or
Yeah.
when is he being himself, or where is that self, you know, even as, he, at various points would just kind of come out and look pretty much like you would imagine David Bowie would look like,
Yeah.
Um,
But do you think that that by itself was a character?
well, I think that needs to be explored,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure what he would say about it, you know. I mean, I met Bowie and interviewed Bowie a couple of times.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, he was he seemed extremely gracious. You
Hmm.
know, there was that kind of quality to him. Uh, I mean, I I remember once we were down at this studio down in NoHo, and forget what record, uh, might have been Heathen. Uh, but he was making coffee, you know, and he prepared a coffee, and I thought he sort of prepared it for me,
Yeah.
and so I took a sip of it, and like he was just like he just burst into laughter, and it's just like, no, no, that was for me. He had put about like 10 sugars in it. That was the other funny thing, you know.
Are you sure it was sugar?
Yeah, oh, it was absolutely sugar. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was absolutely sugar.
Yeah.
And he got a huge kick out of that, Um, and he was, I remember, on he covered a George Harrison song. It wasn't long after Harrison died. Um,
Try some, buy some.
Try Some, Buy Some, yeah.
Yeah.
And he was saying, uh, we always thought, we always thought there would be the Beatles, we always thought. And I said, well, you're the person that was supposed to like erase all that. And he goes, yeah, I know, but like, like he still felt it, he was there was a very, there was a real earnestness about that remark, maybe he saw, maybe a kind of intimation of his own mortality as well. Uh, I think the thing with him, it's different when you're trying to sort of overthrow an existing regime and then you become the regime.
Yeah.
You
So he went from being, like you said, the rebel to the establishment to now in his 8 years after he passed away, um, his portrait is on buildings and his image is in art galleries and universities are studying him. What happened with that? He's transcended the role of a musician or a pop star, and he's become a cultural phenomenon.
Well, I think he succeeded,
Yeah.
There was a huge exhibition. I don't know if you had a chance to see it here at the Brooklyn Museum.
Yes,
Um,
David Bowie is.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there was at the museum, and then there were other parts of it that were in other parts of the city, and in subway stations and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
And one thing, I was very taken with the exhibition at the museum, but I was telling a friend, as we were walking through, I said, at the end of it, there should be like a huge asterisk, and it should say he was also a rock star.
Yeah.
You know, like it was like it was so like kind of David Bowie, cultural studies,
Yeah.
like in the fashion and the gender and all of this stuff, but like I remember there is a moment, man, like the first time I saw Bowie on in 1975, maybe, might have been 76. It was the Thin White Duke stuff. It was in Evansville, Indiana, and in like a maybe about a 10,000 seat hall. It wasn't huge, but it was pretty big. And he showed Un Chien Andalou before he came out on stage, and then he walked out in that black and white outfit,
Yeah.
and started playing uh The Return of the Thin White Duke, that song, um and then which is about 10 minutes long,
Yeah.
and they do it and it's very stately, and it was just like, oh wow, this is just incredible. And then right as it ended, they went right into Suffragette City, and like they were fucking rocking. Like, it just was so exciting. Like the build up, but then like, yo, we're here to do this too. And I've always felt that like, you know, that's often an aspect of Bowie that people overlook. That rock stuff, man. I mean, like, he really liked to do it. He was a believer, talking to him, he, I mean, I will say this, I mean, he hardly needs it, but you know, I say this to in a way that's meant to be flattering. It was like talking to a critic, you know. He thought about the history of that music, thought about R&B, thought about rock and roll, thought about what it all meant, you know, you know, for all the irony and for all of the shape shifting, that was kind of a through line. There was a kind of sense of really meaning it, really wanting it to have impact. Um,
It's, I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, not at all.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
If that's a conversation you had with him around Heathen, around 2002 or so, it seemed like earlier in his career, he was almost disrespectful about his own work, but then later he became more reflective. And I what do you think was happening there? I think also um, our larger society treated him differently. 30 years ago, it kind of wasn't cool to be a Bowie fan. He was almost thought of as a has been, and which is not, I don't think, how he's thought of today. What was happening at that time, 20 years ago?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it just in the circles that I move in or whatever, but like, I'm not sure that anybody ever thought of him as a has been.
Yeah,
I mean, he wasn't, I don't know. I try to keep this in mind, and I certainly tell this to my students. I say, look, there are a handful of times that you get to alter the course of culture.
yeah,
Like if you do it once, you're in the Hall of Fame.
yeah,
You are, have achieved something that is very, very rare. If you do it more than once, couple of times, three times, four times, maybe, you know, you're at the absolute apex. Living contemporaneously with artists it's important to keep that in mind when people speak so dismissively. I mean, I was reading a thing today, it got online on Facebook. A number of these people were friends of mine too, I should say. They were, you know, they're sort of talking very dismissively about the Who, performing or the Stones performing. It's just sort of like, are you kidding? Like, you know, the Stones shows are so good.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen the Who in a while, but you know, I mean, these kind of, oh, they're a Stones cover band, you know, and I don't, I don't get that. I don't, people are very dismissive of McCartney. It's just like this guy changed the world.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, how many times do you want him to do that? Like, and not that you have to like everything, but I think a certain level of kind of respect is in order. And I was always curious about what Bowie was doing.
Yeah.
I never expected him again to have the kind of impact that he had early on. But those records he was making at the end of his life, demonstrate the degree to which he still was trying. You
Yeah.
know, he still took that very just took his role as an artist very seriously. And that's all that you can ask. I mean, really, it's stupid to kind of think, oh yeah, well, he's not like he was in 1973. It's like, well, what do you like? Like what, it's just, you know, uh, how could you even bring that up? Like the the there's such a lack of I mean, Bowie didn't particularly do this. At least I missed it if he did, but like, he didn't go out and play albums of his, although, he really could have.
Yeah.
That would have been pretty great. He was, I think pretty reluctant to look backwards,
Right.
and I understand that. But I also think it would have been a perfectly legitimate project for him to do, like go out and, play all of, the Berlin records or play all of Scary Monsters or, just like hell. Why, he created that.
Right.
Like, why doesn't he have access to it? And why, let alone me, who is, seen Bowie beginning in 1976 or whatever. But, kids or, younger people who are interested in rock and roll history, to get to see, um, Bowie do his great songs or, not that he ever really did that either, I mean, he was always like a little, he never quite did the set I would have liked him to do, you know. Um, but, you know, he did enough of them. He did enough of the songs really wanted to hear. Uh, you know, I don't know how long you have to maintain um uh, you know, a complete striving for newness. That's complete, you know, at some point you're carrying around a large body of work
Yeah.
done, and what the fuck? Like, who else is gonna play it? Like, why wouldn't you want to go out and play, Changes or,
Yeah.
Suffragette City or, any of those incredible songs, and it's just, um, I don't know. Man, I would have liked to do it if I were in that situation. It's it's great to come out with new stuff. You could kind of do both, you know.
I got the sense after Earthling that he decided that he wasn't going to make music for young people anymore, and that the next album was Hours, which isn't my favorite of his albums, but there's an image on the cover of his latest manifestation holding sort of pieta like his previous manifestation, and it's almost like that version is dead or exhausted, and he started singing about topics of interest to middle-aged men, which I didn't appreciate at the time because I wasn't yet a middle-aged man. But it's like, oh, now I understand what he's singing about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I never, I mean, that record he made with Eno, maybe in the late 90s, when he went out on tour with Nine Inch Nails and stuff.
Outside, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really like that record too much, Like, I felt like he was kind of trying too hard,
Mm-hmm.
Like, why? I don't know. I think as an artist, you develop a sense about yourself. I think it was difficult for him, up to a certain point to um, just sort of let go of being the enfant terrible,
Yeah.
uh, there are lots of ways to be creative. There are lots of ways to be artistic. At a certain point in your life, you know, it's kind of other people's jobs to, upset the apple cart, maybe.
Yeah. If you have a time for just a couple more questions, you've been great,
Yeah.
and I appreciate this. I let me sort of turn the camera to you for a moment. You have a foot in academia. You're
Yeah.
teaching at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. You've been a contributing editor to Rolling Stone for 30 years, and have been a music journalist, I think, for longer than that.
Yeah.
And you've collaborated with some of your subjects. You
Yeah.
you you helped Clive Owen with his autobiography, your biography of Lou
Outdated.
Reed. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My forgive my misspeaking.
I don't know.
Although he could probably use the help if Clive Owen wanted to buy.
I would probably do it, man, if the price was right.
I'm sorry about that. But
Right.
you won a Grammy for liner notes for Eric Clapton's Crossroads, and it's almost like you're looking at part of our culture from three different perspectives. And I'm wondering how you synthesize all of that, either if you want to use Bowie as an example or just speak more broadly. By the way, it sounds like a dream career. Don't
Um,
tell me it's not as interesting as it seems.
no, really, as you were running down some of those high points, when I hear someone say it, I just think, oh, that sounds pretty good, and it has been really good. And I, so much has changed, and we could talk for a million hours about everything that's changed in the music industry and media and everything else. But um, the way I think about those different, the journalism, academia, collaborations, this is the stuff I think about all the time, you know? And so, you know, whether I'm in a classroom or at my computer or, it doesn't make any difference really. I mean, obviously it makes a difference in terms of, how I approach things, but uh, it's just fitting the ideas into a context. I, you know, think about David Bowie quite often.
Yeah.
He was important to me. When Bowie died, man, I was like really struck. I mean, my Facebook page, which, I'm kind of abandoned in a funny way. I mean, it's still up there, but I don't use it as much as I used to. But that Bowie's death it almost became like a sort of seminar on David Bowie. Like, not that I was teaching, but I was directing. People were posting the most astonishing stuff. They were coming up with incredible performances and incredible images, incredible memories. And I was just sort of steering it. Man, it was so, I mean, it was a celebration, but it
Yeah.
was also sad, you know. But it didn't require much to do that, you know. I mean, I would have done it my own version of it by myself, but
Yeah.
I was able to share that with so many people. So, you know, when I'm in these situations, what the through line is me kind of and my own experiences of these artists and this music, you know. It's the stuff that runs through my brain all the time, you know, and uh so if you know, I remember one time uh Rolling Stone had wanted Samantha Power, who eventually became like our UN ambassador,
Yeah.
interview Bono, but something came up in her life and she couldn't do it. And you know, that morning, you know, Rolling Stone called me and just said, "Look, can you go interview Bono for 2 hours this afternoon?" I was like, "Sure." Like, you know, because I think about you too a lot. You know, like
Yeah.
it's not. I don't mean to say that I don't work at this stuff, you know, because I do, but it doesn't feel like work. It feels like just what my life is.
Yeah.
So yeah, to get up in front of a group of students and talk about David Bowie and figure out what I'm going to show them or play for them and you know see their responses. Uh, you know, like it's great when I get a great response. You know, a little disappointing when I don't. But you know, what's important to me finally is what's going on inside me. You know, which is you know, as a way to spend an afternoon, it was pretty great. You know.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, you know, that's those those uh those various contexts kind of don't I don't I know what the distinctions are, but they're not that meaningful to me.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that I mean, I think you have a fascinating life, and if you ever decide to teach your class online, I would sign up right away.
Yeah, so many people are, you know, honestly, people have talked to me about that, you know. I mean, Penn, you know, I mean, Penn wants their money, I guess is finally what it comes down to, you know, like, you know, but there might be some way to do something like it, you know. I what I like about the class is that it's totally improvisational.
Yeah.
What I'm feeling like talking about. And but what I'm feeling like talking about is partly a read of them and what I think they're they need or they want or whatever, you know. But yeah, there might be something to do along those lines. I'll have to, you know, I'm not you know, I'm very good if people bring me ideas and to say, "Oh yeah, sure, we'll do that." I'm not so good at coming up with them myself, strangely, but it's you know, it might be a good idea to try to do something like that. But then
Well,
you get
yeah.
harangued. I mean, I'm stringing this thing along. You know, like you make one mistake, you know, and like people just like lose their minds, you know. That's the downside of social media, you know.
Oh, because it's you can't get rid of it.
Well, yeah, no, you can't get rid of it, but it's sort of like it's very unforgiving, you know. Trying to think of a kind of a good example of what this was like. Um, I remember one time, oh God, well, this is, you know, this is, I don't mean to justify making mistakes, you know, but I remember one time I was writing something and I confused a Morrissey album with a Smiths album, you know, man, like people came down very hard. Just like, yo, you know, I mean, it was a mistake. I'm terribly sorry. I wish I hadn't done it, but easy. you know, and kind of it can be harsh, man. The online world is tough.
That that makes me think the artists themselves will sometimes confuse what albums they,
Oh my
what,
God,
yeah,
always. Yeah, yeah, always. And it's kind of understandable. I mean, I can't. That's a question I've heard so many times more. What record was that on again?
yeah.
You're asking about a particular song.
Bowie claimed to have no recollection of making Station to Station whatsoever.
Yeah, well, that's kind of believable. Like, I mean, it's a great record and
Yeah.
possibly my favorite Bowie record, but you know, he was in quite a state doing that one.
So let me close this with asking a question I ask everybody, which is the most superficial of possible question, which is, what is your favorite Bowie album and what is your favorite Bowie song?
Well, since we're talking about it, I mean, Station to Station may well be, I have such vivid memories of seeing him perform those songs. Um, it's a very deep record. Um, oh, the favorite song is tough, like um, I might say, I mean, I realize this might seem, but Suffragette City is possibly my favorite song.
Yeah.
There's such a sort of I mean that Hey Man thing, the Wham Bam Thank You Man. Like I love songs that put those, you know, those breaks, kind of hesitations, and then you launch back in. And on stage, man, he crushed it, you know. So I mean those would probably be my answer. They're not again the most, you know, well, the Station to Station one is pretty sophisticated, but the hell, I'll stand by him. It's supposed to be fun too.
I'm very jealous of you because my first Bowie concert was the Glass Spider tour,
Ah,
which
I saw
which
it.
was exciting, and it was right. It was in a way it was a good first concert because everything that came after was even better. But I sure would have liked to have seen him in '76.
And so if I was talking to him about the Glass Spider tour one time,
Yeah,
because he was very dismissive of it. And I said, I kind of enjoyed that show, and he was just like, "Oh, really? Like what?" And I just said, "Well, like in front of a stadium of like, 70,000 people, you did a 7-minute ballad, Loving the Alien."
yeah.
Like, that's pretty daring. And he seemed to like brighten a little bit at that idea, you know?
If you look at the playlist for those concerts, he would start with his new hits, and then the longer he got into it, he would do more challenging songs. I think he did "Waiting for the Man" during the Glass Spider tour, which is
Well, he
supposed to
did,
be,
he certainly
yeah,
did. At the show I saw, he did White Light, White Heat.
yeah, yeah. It's about speed. I mean, it's that's not what you're expecting of
No,
family friendly David Bowie in 1987.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's,
Oh,
yeah, no, and it was so elaborate. It was fun seeing Frampton up there too.
yeah, yeah. Underrated guitar player.
Very much so. And I was always delighted, or delighted to learn how they were childhood friends, and and Frampton's father, whom Bowie, to the day he died, always referred to as Mr. Frampton, was his music teacher, you know. It's kind of lovely.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This has been terrific. I'm really thrilled that you've given me so much time, and I know that people who visit my blog are really going to eat this up. So thank you very much.
Well, let me know when it goes up, man.
Yeah, I definitely will. We should stay in touch.
Please.